All right, folks, it is Monday, December 14th, and today is the day. Today is the day when not only will the Electoral College vote for our next president, but it is also the day that we expect to see the bipartisan stimulus bill, the $908 billion stimulus bill, or actually, stimulus bills. More on that later. You know we deserve more than this. I know we deserve more than this, but if this is all Congress can come up with right now, so be it. Last week I played you the clip where Joe Manchin seemed to imply we wouldn't see a bill until Monday. Today, looks like he wasn't exaggerating. Manchin and Bill Cassidy, who's also working on this thing, said yesterday the bill will be introduced today. Yesterday they said tonight, but now we're getting reports that they are set to unveil it at 4 p.m. Eastern time today. Could come later, as we all know. Word on the street. For the sake of, as Manchin said, not letting the perfect be the enemy of good, word on the street is that the package they will unveil today will present two options, two bills to lawmakers. Option one is simply the $748 billion worth of relief items that we saw in the outline last week that they agree on, right? I'm not going to go through the outline again, but it's basically everything on this chart except that top item, state and local for $160 billion, and except the bottom item, liability protection, which doesn't really have a price tag to speak of. It's just making a law. So that is one component of this bill we're expected to see, or possibly one full bill. And then there's another component here that includes the $160 for state and local, married to liability protection. Okay, two separate options, possibly even separate bills, but basically they're structuring it so lawmakers could just go for the $748, right, the stuff that's not as controversial, or they could go for that plus state and local and liability protection, right, or they could go for some blend of these two bills, right. This tells me they're not confident in the language they've put together on state and local and on liability protection. They're not confident that the language they have will please the powers that be, namely Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi. Frankly, I don't blame them, given Mitch's comments last week. Now, we know that Mitch McConnell has said that he is fine with punting state and local liability protection until next year, despite the fact that earlier this year he called liability protection a deal breaker in any next COVID relief package. We also know that Mitch McConnell was open to a $916 billion stimulus package that was put together last week by Steve Mnuchin. So this top line of $748 billion, and keep in mind, they're using hundreds of billions of dollars in unused CARES Act money, so this is actually very little new money, relatively speaking. So this top line of 748 should not offend Mitch McConnell at all. And heck, even if you took the 748, threw in 160 or so for $600 stimulus checks, like in the latest Mnuchin proposal, Mitch could even go for that. In fact, the Washington Post is reporting this morning, according to two anonymous sources, that some lawmakers in the bipartisan group have suggested including another round of stimulus checks in the smaller package. The Post says that Republicans have tried to keep the price tag below $1 trillion, but if state aid is left out, they might have enough money to include the stimulus checks. This is something we have speculated about before. This is something we have even heard the number 2 Republican Senator John Thune hint at, but this morning we're actually seeing a report of this sort of thinking within the bipartisan group itself. And apparently, according to the Post, the bipartisan group has circulated options internally for structuring the checks, the stimulus checks, but didn't reach an agreement, but it's still something they considered. This is interesting because publicly all we've heard from people in this group, this bipartisan group, like Warner and Cassidy, is no stimulus checks, as though it was a foregone conclusion. But apparently some of the bipartisan group were pushing for checks. Will something come of this? I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be a crazy, crazy week for stimulus. But unless Mitch McConnell has changed his mind since last week, I don't think he's going for the larger package with the $160 for state and local, married to liability protection, unless he gets a lot of what he wants on liability protection, right? We haven't seen the bills yet, haven't seen the language yet, so we don't know exactly what they're going for here in liability protection, but that's the only way I see this full bill, the one including the state and local and liability protection, working for Mitch. If the Dems working on these bills surrendered a lot on liability protection, right, Mitch might go for this. But if they did that, they would definitely kill it for progressives and perhaps even for more mainstream Dems like Pelosi. Because remember, Mnuchin's proposal had $160 billion for state and local. That's the same as the bipartisan group. I don't think the 160 is an issue for Mitch. I think it's how the 160 is used and how it works in conjunction with liability protection. And remember, in Mnuchin's proposal, it was put forth by Republicans. In that proposal, the Republicans probably stated exactly what they want on liability, right? So the question really is Nancy Pelosi open to the 748 without state and local funding apart from what's needed for vaccine distribution? Or is she open to giving up a lot on liability protection? It all comes down to Nancy, because apparently by all indications, Mitch is cool with the 748, maybe even cool with some skinny stimulus checks thrown in, right? And punting state and local and liability protection to next year. On Saturday, I shared with you my opinion that Nancy Pelosi wants state and local funding more than Mitch McConnell wants liability protection right now. You can watch that video if you missed it. My eyes are on Nancy Pelosi. Pelosi has not yet to this point indicated an openness to another relief bill without substantial state and local funding in it. Will she relent here at the 11th hour? That is the question, folks. That is the question. However, Pelosi spokesman tweeted yesterday that Pelosi and Mnuchin spoke by phone yesterday to discuss the latest on COVID-19 relief and government funding, and Pelosi reiterated her position on the importance of state and local funding. Apparently, Pelosi said she is willing to reach a compromise on the liability protection if it doesn't jeopardize workers' safety. Obviously, Mnuchin and Pelosi will speak again today. But folks, why isn't Pelosi talking to Mitch? Why isn't Mitch talking to Pelosi, right? I would much rather have Pelosi and McConnell having conversations right now than Pelosi and Mnuchin. But in any event, Pelosi is still talking up state and local funding. No surprises there. But Steny Hoyer, the number 2 House Democrat, House Majority Leader, did say on CNN yesterday that, well, yes, state and local aid is critically important. Other things are critically important as well, and sometimes you don't get everything you want. So maybe hinting there, mainstream Dems might be open to not as much state and local as they've talked about previously. This morning, the 2 Problem Solvers co-chairs, Gottheimer and Reed, they were on CNBC's Squawk Box cheering on the bill, right? They're just big old stimulus cheerleaders, as they do, right? And then out in left field, we have people like Josh Hawley and Bernie Sanders perhaps threatening to derail government funding for the sake of stimulus checks, because remember, last week, Congress only passed a 1-week extension until this Friday. So out in left field, we have people like Sanders perhaps threatening to derail the government funding omnibus this week, right? If Congress doesn't pass stimulus checks along with the stimulus package. Because remember, both Pelosi and McConnell want to wrap both government funding and stimulus into one package. And then in left field, we have Trump once again threatening a veto of the Defense Authorization Act that overwhelmingly passed Congress last week. Look, I'm not too concerned about this in and of itself, because I think Congress would be willing to, even if they need to cut short their Christmas break, to override a veto, right? Or deal with a pocket veto. Question becomes, of course, if Congress does evade or override Trump's veto here, will that peeve Trump off to the point of not signing off on stimulus? I hope not. I played you the clip yesterday where Trump said he still wants stimulus. But look, the guy has a little over 5 weeks left in office at this point. Anything can happen. If Congress peeves him off because they override his veto, possible that he'll say, screw it, not sign the stimulus bill, even if it's passed by Congress. But then, of course, Congress could just override that veto, but they need a 2/3 majority in both houses, right? The complicating factor here is Christmas break. If Trump pulls shenanigans, would Congress be willing to cut their break short in order to deal with potential Trump veto or vetoes? Now, I know many of you will disagree with me on this point, but I do think that if Trump vetoes, right, Congress will act. Congress will deal with it. If they don't, heads will roll. The people will not forget in 2022. And also, from Trump's perspective, vetoing a stimulus bill as his last major move in office would not bode well for Trump if he has any future presidential ambitions whatsoever, to say the least, right? What a crappy ending to a presidency to veto a stimulus bill that the country has waited for 9 months, right? But basically at this point, we're just sitting tight, waiting to see those bills. So COVID-19, 184,248 new cases yesterday with 1,357 deaths. The first COVID-19 vaccinations in the United States were given shortly after 9 a.m. Eastern time this morning at Long Island Jewish Medical Center in Queens. All right, everybody, that is my update for now. Let's all keep our eyes open, waiting for 4 p.m. Eastern when we just might see that new bill. Might come later, though. See you then. Bye-bye.